Mark had been driving for Uber for 3 years, and by now, he thought he'd seen it all. The late-night drunks, the awkward first dates, the business people too absorbed in their phones to say hello. Thursday night, November 16th, felt like any other shift. The city streets glistened with recent rain, neon signs reflecting off wet pavement like fractured dreams. At 11:47 p.m., his phone chimed. New ride request, pickup at Morrison Tower, a glass and steel office building that looked abandoned at this hour. Drop off 40 minutes away in Riverside Estates. Mark accepted, pulled up to the curb, and watched as a man in a dark suit emerged from the shadows of the building's entrance. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, carrying nothing but a small leather briefcase. He opened the back door, slid in without a word, and Mark felt it immediately, that subtle shift in the air when someone brings their entire world into your car, even if they don't say a thing. The first 15 minutes passed in near silence. Mark tried his usual opening lines. "How's your night going?" A quiet, "Fine, thanks." "Heading home?" A simple, something like that. The man's eyes stayed fixed on the window, watching the city lights blur into suburban darkness. Mark adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, feeling the familiar rhythm of the road beneath him. The GPS showed 31 miles remaining, a straight shot down Highway 7 before turning into the residential maze of Riverside. Everything felt routine, professional, safe. But then, at mile marker 18, somewhere between the last gas station and complete darkness, the passenger leaned forward slightly and spoke in a voice so measured it seemed rehearsed. "I need you to make a stop before the final destination. It's not on the app. I'll pay you extra." Mark's stomach tightened. 3 years of driving had taught him when something felt off, and this felt off. "Where exactly?" Mark asked, keeping his tone neutral, professional. The man pulled out his phone, showed him a location pin dropped in the middle of what looked like nowhere, no street address, just coordinates pointing to a spot off Old Miller Road. "It's a dirt turnoff about 2 miles ahead on the right. No sign. You'll see a gap in the trees." Mark's mind raced through his options. Company policy said, stick to the route. His gut said, don't deviate into dark, unmarked locations with strangers. But the man added, "I'll give you $100 cash. I just need 5 minutes. I won't even leave the car." $100 would cover his gas for the week. Mark had a daughter whose birthday was coming up. He glanced in the rearview mirror, studied the man's face, tired eyes, the kind that had seen too much, not the kind that planned harm. 5 minutes. Mark heard himself say. That's it. The turnoff appeared exactly where the passenger said it would. A narrow opening between thick pine trees that the headlights barely penetrated. Mark slowed the car, turned onto the dirt path, and felt gravel crunch beneath the tires. The darkness here was absolute, the kind that makes you aware of every sound, the engine's hum, your own breathing, the rustle of fabric as the passenger shifted in his seat. After about 50 yards, the man said, "Here. Stop here." Mark put the car in park, but kept the engine running, 1 foot ready on the gas pedal. His phone showed no signal. They were surrounded by trees on all sides, the main road already invisible behind them. "Now what?" Mark asked, trying to keep the edge out of his voice. The passenger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and Mark noticed for the first time that the man's hands were shaking. "Can you turn off the engine?" the passenger asked quietly. "Just for 5 minutes. Please." Every instinct Mark had screamed, no. But something in the man's voice, not threatening, but pleading, made him hesitate. "Why?" Mark asked directly. "What's going on here?" The passenger opened his eyes, and in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, Mark saw they were filled with tears. "My daughter," the man said, his voice cracking on the word. "This is where I lost her. 3 years ago tonight. I need 5 minutes of silence. In the dark, where it happened." The The words hung in the air like smoke. Mark felt his chest tighten, his own defensive walls crumbling. He thought of his daughter, safe at home, asleep in her bed, and suddenly this wasn't a strange request from a suspicious passenger. It was a father's grief made manifest in the back seat of his car. Mark turned off the engine. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of wind moving through branches and the passenger's quiet, controlled breathing. Mark didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. He simply existed in that moment with a stranger's pain, bearing witness to a ritual of remembrance that required nothing but presence. The man's daughter had been 17, he finally explained in whispers. A car accident on the main highway. She'd been thrown from the vehicle, landed here, in these trees. The ambulance took 40 minutes. She died holding a paramedic's hand, asking for her father, who couldn't get there in time. Every year, on this night, at this hour, he came back. Not to the hospital where she died, not to the cemetery where she was buried, but here, to the last place she was alive, where the universe made its cruelest decision. I used to drive here myself, the man continued, his voice steadier now. But 2 years ago, I got a DUI on the way back. Grief and whiskey don't mix well. Lost my license for a year. Even after I got it back, my wife hides my keys on this date. She thinks coming here makes it worse, that I need to move on. Maybe she's right, but I can't. Not yet. So I take an Uber. I make up a destination nearby, and I ask the driver to stop. Most refuse. One guy threatened to call the police. Last year, a woman stopped but kept the engine running and watched me the entire time like I was going to attack her. He paused, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You're the first person who just sat with me, who didn't make me feel like a criminal for grieving my own daughter. Mark felt a lump form in his throat. How many times had he judged passengers before knowing their stories? How many silent people had he dismissed as rude when they were simply carrying unbearable weight? So tell me, would you have stopped? Would you have turned off the engine? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this story isn't finished yet. The 5 minutes stretched longer, maybe 7, maybe 10. Time loses meaning in darkness shared with someone else's sorrow. Finally, the passenger straightened up, cleared his throat, and said, "We can go now." Mark started the engine, carefully backed out onto the dirt path, and returned to the main road. The rest of the drive to Riverside Estates passed in silence again, but it was different now, not the awkward silence of strangers, but the comfortable quiet of two people who had shared something real. When Mark pulled up to the final destination, a modest 2-story house with warm lights in the windows, the passenger handed him 5 crisp $20 bills. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Mark shook his head. "Take it. You gave me something more valuable than money. You gave me 5 minutes where I didn't have to explain, didn't have to justify, didn't have to pretend I'm okay when I'm not." The man opened the door, then paused. Her name was Emily. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. And she was real. She mattered. I just needed someone to know that, even if just for tonight. He stepped out of the car, and Mark watched him walk up the driveway where a woman, his wife, presumably opened the front door and embraced him. Mark sat there for a moment, engine idling, thinking about Emily, a girl he'd never met, who died 3 years ago in the woods behind him, whose father needed a stranger's patience to honor her memory. He thought about all the invisible grief people carry, the silent ceremonies they perform, the unusual requests that make perfect sense once you know the story. As he drove away, Mark made a mental note to hug his daughter extra tight when he got home, to never take a single boring, ordinary Thursday for granted. You've stayed with me this far, and I want to say thank you, truly. Thank you for listening to Emily's story, for sitting in that darkness with Mark and that grieving father. The best part of this story is still coming, and I promise you won't want to miss it. 3 weeks later, Mark received a message through the Uber app. It was from the same passenger. "I wanted you to know my wife and I talked, really talked, for the first time in years. I told her what you did, how you didn't judge me, how you just let me be human," she cried. Then she held me, and she said maybe next year she'll come with me. Maybe we can grieve together instead of apart. I don't know if that makes sense, but I wanted to thank you. You didn't just drive me somewhere that night. You helped me find my way back to my family. Mark read the message 3 times, sitting in his parked car outside a 7-Eleven at 2 in the morning. He thought about how close he'd come to refusing that stop, how easily he could have said no and driven straight to the destination, keeping his 5-star rating secure and his conscience untroubled. He would have never known about Emily, never witnessed a father's love that transcended death, never understood that sometimes the most unusual request is simply an invitation to be human together. He saved that message. On hard nights when passengers were rude or tips were scarce, when he questioned why he was still driving strangers around at ungodly hours, he'd read it again, because that's what Mark learned in those 5 minutes of darkness. Everyone has an Emily. Everyone has a loss they carry, a place they return to, a moment they can't let go. And sometimes, being a good person isn't about following policy or playing it safe. Sometimes, it's about turning off the engine and sitting in the dark with someone who just needs a witness to their pain. The unusual request wasn't unusual at all. It was the most human thing in the world. It was a father saying his daughter's name out loud and needing someone to listen. It was grief asking for 5 minutes of acknowledgement in a world that demands we move on, get over it, be productive. And Mark gave him that. Not because he was paid to, but because when we strip away the fear and the judgment and the walls we build between strangers, we're all just people trying to honor the ones we've loved and lost. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever made an unusual request that others didn't understand? Have you ever been that passenger with the invisible story? Drop your experience in the comments. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button for Last Ride. Every week, we bring you real stories from real rides, the moments that happen between pickup and drop-off that remind us we're all human. And before you go, the next video is already waiting for you. Another ride, another story, another reminder that the back seat of a car can become sacred space when we open ourselves to each other's humanity. Click it now. Emily's story deserves to be heard, and so do all the others waiting in the queue. Thank you for riding with us. Thank you for listening. And thank you for remembering that behind every unusual request is a person who just needs a moment of grace.